Welcome back from the bye week, and welcome to another episode of the Buckeye Fever podcast. My name is Dave Holmes. I'm your host, as always. This week, the Buckeyes host Nebraska at the Shoe. We're going to talk about the Cornhuskers in just a bit. I'll be joined by Beanie Wells. He'll stop by, as well as former ABC6 Sports Director Clay Hall. Good stuff from both of those guys planned. I don't want to really talk about the Oregon game much more because if you listen to the bye week episode last week, we really picked that game apart with the Ducks. I will say this, that now that we are removed from the loss at Eugene, the traditional side of me is ready to capitulate. The traditional side of me, who was clinging to my four-team playoff, which is kind of comical because that's not traditional at all, that side of me is now ready to say, you know what, maybe I'm wrong. And maybe this 12-team thing isn't going to devalue the regular season because I'm just as into the games as I always was. I was just as into Georgia, Texas as I would have been. I was into Georgia, Bama. I was into Ohio State, Oregon. And none of those were season-ending losses for those teams. And what has happened now, and I should have seen this coming, is this second tier of teams now becomes so much more interesting to me. I'm looking at you, Indiana Hoosiers, 7-0, ranked 13th in the poll. Do you think right now in the old format, even the most diehard Hoosier fan would have believed that their team had any shot of making the top four? No way. And yet now Indiana, I understand quarterback's injured right now. They got to get him back. But Indiana is a legitimate playoff contender. How about BYU? 11th, 7-0. You think BYU honestly believed that they were a playoff team in the old format? Of course not. Iowa State, Matt Campbell, ranked 10th, 7-0. The Cyclones, they are a legitimate playoff contending team. By the way, Matt Campbell to Michigan, just saying. I'm not saying, I'm just saying. Tuck it away. Just tuck it away. How about Pitt? Pittsburgh. What in the name of Tony Dorsett is going on? Pitt is 6-0. By the way, kids, Google Tony Dorsett. Google Dan Marino while you're at it. Pitt used to play good football. Well, now they're ranked 19th. They're 6-0. Wouldn't have taken them seriously, and I'm not ready to take them seriously yet, but I'm just saying these are the teams that now have interesting Novembers ahead. And now I'm invested into these second-tier games every week. By the way, we here on the Buckeye Fever podcast love the troops. Other podcasts might not like the troops. We like the troops here. That's a hot take. Army and Navy, 7-0, 6-0. The service academies are relevant now as we are getting ready for Halloween season. Army and Navy are relevant football teams. And you know what's awesome is Notre Dame's ranked 12th. They are right on the bubble right now for the playoff, so Notre Dame is a storyline. Will they, won't they? What's awesome, Notre Dame plays both Army and Navy the rest of the way. So all three of those teams wouldn't have been interesting in the old format. Now I'm into Army, Navy, and Notre Dame. So Ohio State lost to Oregon. Yeah, it's frustrating. Coulda, shoulda, woulda. Maybe they'll get the Ducks again at Lucas Oil Stadium. We'll see. But overall, the state of college football, I'm more into it now than perhaps at any point in my lifetime. Speaking of college football history, when we return on the Buckeye Fever podcast, Beanie Wells and I are going to talk about the best college football teams of our lifetime. And a little tease here, the Nebraska Cornhuskers are at the top of my list. The Nebraska Cornhuskers come to town this weekend at the Shoe, and it makes me think about what I think is the best college football team I've ever watched in my lifetime, the 1995 Nebraska Cornhuskers. For more on some of the other best teams, let's bring in former Ohio State running back Beanie Wells. So, Beanie, let me start the conversation there. 95 Nebraska. You have Tommy Frazier, undefeated. Half their wins that year were by 50-plus, and no team came within 14 of them. So you are a little younger than I am. I'm not going to say how much, but so when you look back on your life, what are the most dominant college football teams you can remember?
I certainly remember that Nebraska football team.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you go to Lawrence Phillips, and I think you had the incoming freshman Ahmad Green coming in at that point in time.
You ended up being a Packer later on.
Yeah, yep. So certainly remember that football team. They were really good and dominant, but I think I got to go back to 2001. and I look at this University of Miami football team. When you look at the roster, how many Hall of Famers were on this roster, and then just watching them go out and dominate people week in and week out. You talk about Clinton Portis, Willis McGahee, Frank Gore is a backup running back, and then on the flip side of it, Ed Reed, Philip Buchanan. I mean,
I've got a list right here.
On and on and on. I mean, Ken Dorsey, the quarterback.
I do my research. Okay, ready for this? The guys you all mentioned: Dorsey, Clinton Portis, Willis McGahee, Andre Johnson, Hall of Famer. You mentioned Gore, Bryant McKinney on the line.
Yes.
You had the tight end combo of Kellen Winslow, Jeremy Shockey. You had Vince Wilfork, Jonathan Vilma, the late Sean Taylor. Oof. Ed Reed, Philip Buchanan, Antrell Roll, and we still left off 5 or 6 more guys.
Exactly. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, just to imagine all of those guys on one football team. Forget how dominant they were in the NFL, because a lot of those guys were NFL greats.
Yeah.
But with the college team, I mean, you had to be terrified to go up against those guys. And they were just balling week in, week out.
And the crazy thing is the next year they're almost as good, and then Ohio State actually beats them. I mean, you can make a case that Ohio State broke Miami.
Right.
Because since then, it's been 22 years. They've never been the same.
Nope.
All right, who else jumps out at you?
Oh, I think you got to go back to the 2003, 2005.
Okay.
USC. So
yeah,
I've been the 04 team going into 05.
04 going into 05. Yes. So you're talking Liner Theismann and Reggie Bush on his way
Bush,
up.
Lindale White, Dwayne Jarrett, Fred Davis. And then on the flip side of that, Ray Monalua, Clay Matthews. I mean, they had some ballers on that football team. And then remember, for like 2 years straight, USC ran college football. Mm-hmm. They were the biggest thing in college football. Pete Carroll at the helm. And then I remember going on a college visit out there, and I'm like, wow, these guys are college players, because in L.A., they were the pro football team.
Yeah.
They were the pro football team. When I'm talking about ran L.A., could do pretty much whatever they wanted. But on the field, I mean, those guys were sensational.
You grew up in Northeast Ohio. You're an Akron guy. I mean, was there ever a chance that you going to USC? Was it enticing enough that you were strongly considered?
Oh, 100%. I committed to USC.
Oh.
A lot of people don't know that. I'm out there on a visit. Pete Carroll, we're sitting at a breakfast place in Malibu. And I'm like, all right, I'm committed to Ohio State at the time. I said, I'm going to have to go and call my parents because I'm decommitting. Yeah. And I told Coach Carroll, I'm coming to USC. He was all ecstatic. I get on the phone with my mom. I tell my mom, she laughs. She puts me on the phone with my dad. I tell my dad, he laughs. My mom gets back on the phone, says, Coach Carroll on the phone. And she's talking to Coach Carroll, and I'm seeing his face change from this big smile to this, like, stoic look. And I'm like, well, what did she say? She said, take you to the airport right now and get you back on the plane to Ohio.
Serious?
Yes. So my mom is the reason why I really didn't end up going to USC, because when I went out there, I wanted to go.
So you committed to USC, and your mom decommitted from USC.
100%.
Well, to be fair, the Olentangy River is the Malibu of the Midwest.
Right.
It really is. The Pacific Ocean and the Olentangy. So it's funny, USC gives way to another team on my list, which would be 2005 Texas. Vince Young, and a lot of people forget, they had one of my favorite NFL players of all time, Jamal Charles, who I just a track star.
Sweet.
So as a running back, you could appreciate him. That era right there where it was Leinart Bush giving way to Vince Young in that Rose Bowl, that was a great 3-year stretch of college football.
Man, that was the greatest, in my opinion, that's probably one of the greatest college football games ever be played.
Yes.
When you watch that game start to finish, all the playmakers, all the big plays, and then watching VY bring that team back to win that game, incredible. He probably, I don't know, it's hard to say he should have won a Heisman Trophy that year, but he very well could have.
He was very good. The other team that jumps out to me, if we're talking recent history, Gen Z, this is for you, for the younger listeners. 2019 LSU, the Burrow team, not only did they obliterate offensive records, but they beat 7 top 10 teams in one season. So it's not like it was Cupcake City. It was a good SEC, and they blew through it.
100%. I mean, when you look at the way they dominated, and Joe Burrow being an Ohio State guy, watching him go there, his first year was okay. Then his second year at LSU, it was like, oh, my gosh. Who is this dude, and how the heck did we let him get out of Columbus, Ohio? Because he was lights out, played the best football, and some would argue probably one of the best college football seasons for a quarterback in college football history.
Yeah.
So that was crazy. But a team that probably jumps out to me is the Alabama team that just obliterated Ohio State.
Devontae Smith just scored another touchdown as we're speaking.
Exactly. I mean, that team was so stacked, and the mere fact that they had all of those wide receivers.
Wait, Jalen Waddle's injured, right? It didn't even matter. Or was it Devontae?
Right.
One of them was injured.
Jalen Waddle was injured. Because Devontae went crazy.
Yeah, because Devontae went berserk.
Yeah, I mean, that team that they had there was wild. And then you look at over the years of Alabama, and at one point in time, you got Mac Jones, Jalen Hurts, and the guy Tua who just got paid $200 million in the NFL.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the quarterback room.
And if we're going to talk one Buckeye team in our lifetime, you know what's very unfortunate is Ohio State has 2 national championships in my lifetime. Okay, you got the Tressel and the Urban one. Mm-hmm. I think the 2015 team that didn't win it all is one rainy day against Michigan State away from being on this list. They have 5 or 6 first rounders?
Yes.
That team was probably more talented than the team that won it all.
100%. You know, when you look at teams in Ohio State history that didn't win it all, that probably should have. You go back to the '98 Ohio State team to where Michigan State's the culprit again.
Yes.
And now this 2015 one where Michigan State was the culprit of them not going on and doing something incredible. You know, we look at the guys that they had. I mean, Darren Lee, the defense was just loaded. Eli Apple, Marshawn Lattimore. I mean, the list goes on and on with the amount of playmakers that they had. That's up there with any team in the country.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, and Zeke playing at his peak as well. Well, the good news for Buckeye fans, I just checked the calendar. It is 2024, so 1995 Nebraska is not walking through that door today. Beanie Wells, thanks for stopping by.
No problem.
Great stuff, as always, from Beanie Wells. Nebraska Cornhuskers this week. Okay, so some of the luster went off this game when Indiana beat the tar out of Nebraska, okay? That did eliminate some of the shine. I will say this, though. We talked about the Hoosiers briefly earlier in the show. There is at least a 50-50 chance Indiana comes to the shoe 10-0. So that could be real fun in late November. And yeah, the week before Michigan, are you kidding me? A 10-0 Indiana team and a Michigan team, that would be a fun finish to the season. But this week's Nebraska team, they bring Dylan Raiola to town. True freshman quarterback, former Ohio State commit, who looked really good out of the gate. Big yardage numbers. Now, the last 2 weeks he's shown to still be a true freshman. No touchdowns, 4 interceptions over the past couple of weeks. So I think the Buckeyes can make life miserable for Dylan Raiola this week in the shoe. You know, and it's funny because 10 years ago, if you lose a 5-star quarterback like Dylan Raiola, he decommitted to Ohio State, ends up in Nebraska, you would have said, what's wrong with the program? Are there cracks in the program? Is it a culture thing? And now it's like, he's just another. Quinn Ewers comes in, I think takes a handoff and kneel down a couple plays. He goes to Texas. Emory Jones was the next big thing until he wasn't. I mean, there were all these 4- and 5-star quarterbacks who were going to be Buckeyes and then never actually became Buckeyes. It's just a different world now. And I remember right when the transfer portal was starting to be a thing, Ohio State basketball had a hotshot prospect. You might remember the name, DJ Carton. Hotshot prospect. So fun to watch. Little guard. Transferred out of Chris Holtman's program. Ended up going to Marquette. Became a pretty good player. At last check, I think he was with the Toronto Raptors and their G League as well, kind of bouncing back and forth. But I remember asking Chris Holtman that question years ago when he was the head coach at Ohio State basketball. And I said, you know, you lose DJ Carton after 1 year. He transfers, one of your highest recruits ever. That would have been not a career killer, but it would have been an indictment on your program in the mid-'90s. And he said, you know, nowadays you really can't take offense when one of these kids leave. And if you're really in it for the kids and you're really in coaching to develop young men, then you want to do what's best for them. And if they think that what's best for them is to leave your program, you can't stand in the way. And that's kind of where we are now. I don't think Ryan Day is going to hold a grudge against Dylan Raiola. I think Jim Knowles' defense is going to get after him, and they're going to make his life miserable. But I think that's the world of college football we live in now, where, you know, you just can't take offense to it because free agency is so prevalent now. It's Dylan Raiola, Quinn Ewers, Emory Jones. The list is going to go on. And the Buckeyes do it to other people, right? Julian Sayin was supposed to be the next big thing in Alabama, and now he's in the pipeline here in Columbus. So that's the current state of college football. Dylan Raiola and the Cornhuskers come to the shoe this weekend. Coming up next, though, you know, Nebraska used to be, as we talked with Beanie Wells, the program in the mid-'90s under Tom Osborne. And now they have really fallen off a cliff over the past 20 years. So I'm going to be joined by Clay Hall, and we are going to analyze the biggest fall from grace programs in the history of college football. That's coming up next on the Buckeye Fever podcast. Yeah, this week the Buckeyes welcome the Nebraska Cornhuskers into the shoe. And, you know, when Nebraska joined the Big Ten, I thought this was going to be one of the premier rivalries in the conference, if not all of college football. Hasn't shaken out like that. And I was thinking about the biggest fall from grace programs, at least during my lifetime, and I thought someone with historical perspective to ask more about this is former ABC 6 sports director Clay Hall, also hosted the Football Fever for all those years. So, Clay, when I look at Nebraska, I think about 94, 95, 97. These guys go undefeated.
Yeah.
3 out of 4 years. I mean, Tom Osborne, Tommy Frazier, unbelievable. So is Nebraska the biggest fall from grace program in your 3+ decades of covering college football?
They're my leadoff hitter in this particular topic. I mean, because I work with a guy from Omaha here at the station who was steeped in all of that tradition.
Yeah.
And he literally, now is just, it's like he's just, afraid of every weekend.
Yeah.
And then, I've been here when he was here. Scott Frost comes along, wins the mythical national championship.
Hang the banner at Central Florida. Yeah, throw the parade, baby.
This is the man.
Mm-hmm.
He takes them to a national title, I think, in 97.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
And the record, 16-31 as the head coach, 0-14 against ranked teams. And yet they sell out. They sell out because of the history and the tradition. And it's hard to believe. And the black shirts have gone away, and they don't pulverize people the way they used to. Maybe now with Matt Rule, it's a new day. But the first few times I went over there, I mean, you walk in there, there's a kind of adjacent to the stadium is all this, almost like a museum of all of what they have done.
Yeah.
And heck, you could do 2 stories right there.
Yes.
And you see these statues of great players and all of the history of winning, of absolutely ruling the roost when they and Oklahoma were, 2 top 5 teams every year.
Yeah. And
so I mean, it's tough being a Mississippi State fan where I went for a few years. But Nebraska to be on top and then to sink so low, surely one day in the NIL era,
goodness,
they will rise up.
Look, I mean, so you've been to Lincoln many times. I've been there a few times. It's not the easiest place to recruit. It's not exactly, it's not Southern California. It's not Scottsdale, but they did it for so long. And something, we're going to name a couple other schools here that came to the top of my mind, but something that I found almost a common thread in these schools is they don't realize, they almost sometimes think they're better than they are or deserve more than they are. And people think the program died when Tom Osborne left. Frank Solich comes in, goes 59-19 and took him to a BCS title game. He took him to the Rose Bowl.
Yeah.
Do you know how quickly Nebraska would take Frank Solich's record now? And you see that with a lot of these teams.
Bo Pelini was 9-3, I think, every year.
Yes.
And yet, because of the history,
we deserve better than 9-3.
Yes.
One that came to mind for me, Miami. Now you can make
that
a case.
was my team.
Is that your? Yeah. So
that's my second.
The Buckeyes broke them. I mean, that's a team that won 5 national titles between 1983 and 2001.
Right.
And since then, they've won 1 bowl game in 17 years, and it was the Russell Athletic Bowl, which I didn't even know existed. Does it still even exist? I don't know. The Russell Athletic Bowl. That's their only bowl win in almost 2 decades. So, yeah, I mean, what happened to Miami? Because unlike Lincoln, South Beach, according to LeBron, is a pretty easy place to recruit, I would think.
Yeah.
Hey, you want to come down here and hang out in South Beach for the next 4 years? That would be an easy recruit.
Oh, you hear the U. And then 20 years of mediocrity, and every coach is going to do it. Mark Richt, I mean, that Cristobal is there now.
Yeah.
12-13 in 2 years. Are you telling me you can't find players in Florida?
Yeah, that's it.
South Florida.
You have a top 5 state to recruit and a top 5 city to get people to come to. I mean, I don't get how Miami is not better than they are.
It's unreal.
Yeah.
And Cristobal was a part of a national championship as a player.
Right.
Big guy, tough guy, pretty good recruiter. It's beyond me.
Yeah. Who else jumps out to you? So I think those are the 2 big. Nebraska, Miami to me are the 2 biggest. Now I think it's kind of more debate from here.
Great minds think alike.
Yeah.
I have a few, but it's like a momentary.
That's where I am. They're kind of
Alabama and Bear Bryant.
Yeah.
And then you go to, and I had to write all these guys down. You go to Mike Dubose, Dennis Francione, Mike Price, and Mike Shula.
Yeah.
Mike Shula was beaten No. Mike Shula was beaten once by Mississippi State Sylvester Croom, who was a former Tide great.
Mm-hmm.
And then when Saban falls in line and gets there too, Croom beats him.
Yes.
And that was, I think, the last game that Nick Saban lost because they they are in there. I had Florida.
Florida, I wrote on kind of my debate because Urban and Spurrier, unbelievable. But since then, and they've been a little better as of late. And to me, they're kind of in the same boat as Tennessee, where it's, I think Tennessee's headed back the right direction now. But again, Philip Fulmer, another one of those examples of the guy wins a title.
Yeah.
Then game's passed him by, and now you're probably looking in the rear view thinking, can we go back and pick that guy back up again?
Yeah.
Because he was the glory days, at least in the more modern Tennessee football time.
No question. USC is another that has had great runs, and then they fall off.
Mm-hmm.
And Lincoln Riley's supposedly the savior now.
Mm-hmm.
But, Michigan had dips.
Yeah.
Had great runs, Bo Schembechler, Lloyd Carr, Jim Harbaugh. That you think, it's only winning.
Mm-hmm.
It was 6 years, Brady Hoke and Rich Rod, and they went away.
Yeah.
They're obviously back.
Yeah, it's funny because Ohio State, I think, it's easy for fans to get frustrated when they go 10-2. And quite honestly, when they go 11-1. But the Buckeyes are one of the few programs that really haven't had that dip in decades. I mean, they obviously had the fickle year was the anomaly, but they really haven't. I mean, have the Buckeyes had an 8-4 season? I mean, just one of those even mediocre seasons.
Well, no, I mean 9-3 Earl.
Yeah.
Coop comes along. It's funny how I have these records in my head.
Mm-hmm.
He was 111-43, won a ton of games.
Yeah.
Lost a lot of big games, but there was never, and he recruited differently. And so they began to take off in a different sense. But since pre-Woody, I mean, there hasn't been, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Earl 180 something game. I mean, it's
the only other one too in my head. You could make a case that Colorado was one of the better football programs
I thought about them.
of the 90s. Back in the old, was it the Big Eight at that point? I mean, but back in the old Big Eight days, they had the Cordell Stewart and Rashawn Salam won a Heisman. And, they had some good teams, and then they went away for a while. Now, people think Deion has them back. I think Deion has them back more perception-wise than results so far.
Yeah.
But it's still, they're a team that at one point was seen as a top 10 perennial program, although their peak was brief maybe.
Wasn't Cordell Stewart a Hail Mary?
Yeah, that was the Michael Westbrook. It was against Michigan.
Michigan.
Yeah. Yes. Michael Westbrook,
They had coaches, they had players.
It's
interesting.
Yeah, it's important to think, Buckeye fans, even when you think things are going poorly, there are a lot of teams that'd rather be you. Thanks again to Beanie Wells and Clay Hall for stopping by, and thanks to you for listening as well on this week of the Buckeye Fever podcast. Next week, it's a big one. On the road, noon kickoff in Happy Valley, the Buckeyes against a top 3 Penn State team. That is huge because the winner of that one is in the driver's seat to get the Ducks at Lucas Oil Stadium. We'll see you next week here on the Buckeye Fever podcast as we talk all things Bucks and Nittany Lions.